What if Princess Beatrice, one of the royal family's quieter grandchildren, is far more important to Queen Elizabeth's private legacy than anyone realized? While the world watched Prince William prepare for the future and followed Prince Harry's dramatic break from royal life, another story was unfolding inside the family. Beatrice was building a life away from the center of the crown, while remaining close to the grandmother who had ruled Britain for decades. Before you move further, tell me from where you are watching. Are you watching from the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else in the world? Write your country in the comments, because this video reaches far beyond the palace gates, and there is a reason Princess Beatrice's story has become so interesting. When Queen Elizabeth entered the final years of her life, her private belongings became part of a much bigger family question. What would happen to the jewelry, photographs, letters, artwork, furniture, and other personal possessions that had followed her through decades of royal history? And among all her grandchildren, where did Beatrice fit into that private legacy? The answer is not as simple as a list of expensive objects. Queen Elizabeth's personal estate was separate from the crown's institutional property. Buckingham Palace and other assets connected to the monarchy were not simply personal possessions that could be divided between grandchildren. But the Queen also had belongings that were hers personally, and those could carry an entirely different meaning. That distinction is important because royal inheritance stories often become confused with the wealth of the crown. The monarchy may be associated with enormous estates and priceless collections, but the sovereign does not personally own everything connected with the institution. The private things were different. They were family things, and family things can be given according to personal wishes. Princess Beatrice was in a unique position to understand that difference. She was not the future queen. She was not expected to become the head of the monarchy. She was not required to build her entire adult life around constitutional duty. Yet she was the daughter of Prince Andrew, the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth, and Prince Philip, the sister of Princess Eugenie, and a member of a generation that had grown up directly inside the changing royal family. For years, Beatrice was often discussed because of the people around her. Her father was constantly in the headlines. Her mother, Sarah Ferguson, remained a recognizable figure. Her sister Eugenie shared many of the same public pressures, and her cousins William, Harry, Zara, Peter, and others each developed their own paths. Beatrice could easily have been lost in that noise. Instead, something quieter happened. She grew into a woman who learned how to live with the royal name without making the royal name her entire identity. She worked, supported charitable causes, built professional interests, married, became a mother, and remained connected to her family. That quiet evolution may be one of the most important parts of her story, because when people talk about Queen Elizabeth's legacy, they usually talk about the crown. They talk about the reign, the ceremonies, the public speeches, and the succession. But there was another legacy being created at the same time. It was the legacy of a grandmother who watched her children and grandchildren grow up, made private memories with them, and knew that one day they would have to live without her. And that is where Princess Beatrice enters the story. These properties were bought privately by her family long ago and belonged solely to her. In addition to real estate, Elizabeth's personal belongings included over 300 pieces of fine jewelry that were specifically hers, not the crown's. She also owned a remarkable collection of racehorses, a private car collection, and investment portfolios that could be worth over £100 million when adjusted for growth. A key point is that transfers between monarchs are exempt from the standard 40% inheritance tax under a 1993 agreement with the government. This means that when Elizabeth's personal wealth passed to King Charles, it did so in full without tax. However, Elizabeth could choose who would receive specific items, properties, or parts of her estate before she died. Reports suggest she made some surprising decisions about these inheritances. A source told Radar Online in July 2022, just 2 months before her death, that she had been focusing on her favorite pieces and determining who deserved what. The whispers hinted at last-minute changes to her will that would shock her heirs. These last-minute changes sparked anger among certain members of the royal family. The Jewelry War, Catherine versus Camilla, and the seeds of resentment. The first major issue involved Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry collection, which set the stage for what happened next. Reports state that Queen Elizabeth decided to leave about $110 million worth of her personal jewelry out of a total of 300 pieces to Catherine, Princess of Wales. This was a significant gift and showed the close bond that developed between the Queen and Catherine in the last months of Elizabeth's life. However, this decision caused some anger in one part of the palace, Camilla's. An insider told Radar Online, "Catherine is clearly the family favorite. She'd never say it, but it's one reason Camilla resents Catherine." To understand why this is important for Princess Beatrice, we need to look at the bigger picture. Queen Elizabeth was not sharing her wealth simply according to titles or public rank. She was making private choices about people and possessions, choices that may have reflected personal relationships as much as royal protocol. That is what makes the inheritance question so fascinating. A private decision could carry an emotional message that the public might never fully understand. But Princess Beatrice's story is very different from the story people once told about the younger grandchildren. She was born into a branch of the family that had already learned what public pressure could do. Her father, Prince Andrew, was one of the Queen's sons, and her mother, Sarah Ferguson, remained a familiar figure around the royal family even after their marriage ended. Beatrice therefore grew up close enough to the center of the monarchy to understand its privileges, but also close enough to its storms to understand their cost. That difference matters when looking at the question of inheritance. Beatrice was never simply a distant granddaughter watching royal events from the outside. She was raised inside a family where every private decision could become a public story. Her name carried history, but it also carried expectations. And as Queen Elizabeth grew older, Beatrice's position inside that family became more interesting, especially because she was not the future queen and was never expected to compete directly with William's line. For years, Beatrice seemed to occupy an unusual place. She had the title, the family connection, and the public visibility, but she did not have the same constitutional role as the senior royals. That gave her a kind of freedom. She could build a career, support causes, attend major royal occasions, and create a life that was recognizably her own. In many ways, that quiet independence may have made her more valuable to a changing monarchy. Queen Elizabeth understood that distinction better than almost anyone. She had spent decades watching different members of her family struggle with the weight of royal life. Some became central figures, some stepped away, some made headlines they could never escape, and some, like Beatrice, slowly learned how to remain connected to the institution without allowing the institution to become their entire identity. There was also another reason Beatrice mattered to the Queen. Beatrice belonged to a generation that had grown up seeing the monarchy challenged from every direction. She had watched William and Catherine become the future of the crown. She had watched Harry and Meghan leave the working royal system. She had watched scandals change the public image of her own branch of the family. Through all of this, she continued to appear at family occasions, often without demanding the spotlight. That is why the inheritance question becomes more complicated than a simple list of jewels or properties. The real question is not only what Beatrice could receive, it is what any personal gift from Queen Elizabeth would have meant. A private object passed from grandmother to granddaughter can carry a family message that is far more powerful than its financial value. It can say, "You were remembered, you mattered, you were part of my story." Queen Elizabeth's personal possessions were different from the assets of the crown. Palaces and other institutional property could not simply be divided among grandchildren, but private belongings were another matter. Jewelry, photographs, horses, letters, artwork, clothing, furniture, and sentimental objects could become part of a deeply personal legacy. And because royal wills are not ordinary family documents, the public often learns very little about the choices made behind closed doors. That secrecy created endless speculation after the Queen's death. Who received the sentimental pieces? Which grandchildren were remembered? Which objects stayed within the senior royal household? Which items went to private homes? And did the Queen's choices reflect old loyalties or simply practical decisions about who would care for each object? Nobody outside the family can know every answer, but the questions themselves show how closely people watched the final chapter of her life. Beatrice's position made those questions especially interesting. She was not the obvious first name people would mention when discussing the royal succession. She was not the person expected to inherit the crown. She was not the person expected to stand at the center of every royal ceremony. Yet she remained a granddaughter of the longest reigning British monarch and a member of a family whose private possessions can carry enormous symbolic value. That combination made her easy to overlook and impossible to dismiss. There was another side to Beatrice that did not always receive enough attention. She had to learn from a young age how to deal with public criticism. Her appearance, her clothes, her family connections, and even her mistakes could become headlines. What looked like a simple royal childhood from the outside was not always simple from the inside. Every event came with cameras. Every decision could be discussed by people who had never met her. Yet Beatrice gradually developed a different approach. Instead of trying to compete with the most famous members of her generation, she built a quieter identity. She became involved in business and charitable work and appeared at events connected to causes that mattered to her. Her work did not make her the central face of the monarchy, but it gave her a role beyond simply being someone's daughter or granddaughter. Her marriage also changed the way the public viewed her. When Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli-Mozzi in 2020 at the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Windsor, the event was intimate and heavily shaped by the circumstances of the time. Queen Elizabeth was there. The photographs were quiet compared with the huge spectacle of some royal weddings. Yet that smaller ceremony carried a powerful family meaning. Beatrice was beginning a new chapter while remaining closely connected to her grandmother. Later came another important change. Beatrice became a mother. Her daughter Sienna gave the princess a new role inside the family and created another generation of the royal line. Suddenly, the question was no longer only what Beatrice might inherit. It was also what parts of the family's history she might preserve and eventually pass to her own child. This is where the story becomes emotional. Royal inheritance is often discussed in terms of money because money is easy to measure. A property has a value, a jewel has an auction estimate, a painting has a market price. But family inheritance works differently. A watch worn by a grandfather can mean more than a house. A handwritten letter can matter more than a diamond. A photograph can become priceless because of who appears in it. Queen Elizabeth was known for living with the knowledge that objects could carry memories. She had inherited possessions from previous generations and understood their connection to the people who came before her. That makes the possibility of personal gifts to her grandchildren more meaningful. If Beatrice received something important, its significance would not necessarily be about wealth. It could be about continuity, and continuity was something the royal family desperately needed. By the final years of Elizabeth's reign, the institution had changed dramatically. Charles had become king. William had moved closer to the throne. Harry had built a separate life overseas. Andrew's public role had collapsed. Other working royals were carrying more responsibilities. In that environment, every reliable family member mattered, even those who were not senior enough to stand at the center of the constitutional picture. Beatrice therefore occupied a middle ground. She was close enough to the royal story to matter, but distant enough to live a more flexible life. That could become an advantage. A modern monarchy may need people who understand royal tradition without being trapped by every old expectation. Beatrice had spent her life learning both sides of that balance. The same balance can be seen in her relationship with her sister Eugenie. The two sisters grew up together, shared many family experiences, and faced public attention from an early age. Yet they developed their own identities. Their closeness also meant that any discussion about inheritance naturally raised another question. Would Queen Elizabeth treat the sisters equally, or would personal circumstances lead her to make different choices? There is no simple public answer to that question. Private family arrangements are private for a reason. Reports and rumors can describe possible decisions, but they cannot replace the actual documents or the family's own statements. That distinction is important because royal inheritance stories often become much more dramatic than the evidence allows. What can be said with confidence is that personal belongings and family relationships existed side by side, and both mattered to Elizabeth. The question of Camilla adds another layer to the story. As queen consort, Camilla became one of the most important people around Charles, but her place in the family was different from that of Elizabeth's blood descendants. That difference sometimes becomes exaggerated in online stories about royal inheritance. The reality is more complicated. A queen can have an important public role while still occupying a different emotional position inside a family than a lifelong granddaughter. Beatrice's relationship with Camilla also has to be viewed through that wider family structure. They were not simply rivals for a box of jewels. They belonged to a complicated institution where different generations, marriages, titles, and personal histories overlapped. If there were disagreements about possessions, they would almost certainly involve emotion and symbolism as much as money. The most fascinating part of Beatrice's story is therefore not the idea of a secret treasure chest. It is the possibility that a granddaughter who spent years outside the center of attention could become unexpectedly important in the family's future. She understands the old monarchy because she grew up around Elizabeth. She understands the new monarchy because she has watched Charles and William reshape it. and she has begun building a family of her own. That gives Beatrice something many people underestimate: perspective. She has seen royal life from several angles. She has experienced the glamour of major ceremonies and the discomfort of difficult headlines. She has watched her parents become subjects of intense public interest. She has seen her cousins become future monarchs. And she has watched her grandmother remain calm while the world around the family changed. Queen Elizabeth's influence on Beatrice may therefore have been less about giving her a specific object and more about teaching her how to survive inside a famous family. The Queen knew that attention comes and goes. She knew that popularity can change overnight. She also knew that duty is measured over years, not one headline. For a granddaughter like Beatrice, those lessons could become a more valuable inheritance than anything placed in a jewelry box. There is also the question of work. Beatrice was not expected to become queen, and for much of her adult life, she was able to develop professional interests outside the traditional full-time royal model. That meant she could prove that a royal title did not have to be the whole story. Her professional experience, charitable involvement, and public appearances showed a different model of royal life. This matters because the younger generation is being asked to redefine what it means to be connected to the crown. The public expects fewer people to carry more responsibility, while also expecting those people to appear modern and relatable. Beatrice can potentially support that system without standing in front of William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, or Louis. Her value is partly in being able to support the family without competing with its future. Then there is the emotional question that remains after Elizabeth's death. What did the Queen want her grandchildren to remember about her? The answer may never be written in a headline. It may live in ordinary objects and private memories. A photograph from Balmoral, a piece of jewelry worn at a family gathering, a letter kept in a drawer, a story told at Christmas. These are the things that can survive when titles and public roles change. Beatrice may ultimately become the keeper of some of those memories. Not because she is the most powerful royal, but because she represents a bridge between generations. She is old enough to remember the Queen as a grandmother, and young enough to remain part of the monarchy's future. That combination is rare, and this is why the story of Princess Beatrice deserves a closer look. For years, the public story around her was dominated by the scandals surrounding her father and the controversies surrounding her family. But Beatrice herself was gradually moving in another direction. She was creating a career, building a marriage, becoming a mother, and finding a way to remain connected to royal life without allowing every headline to define her. If Queen Elizabeth left Beatrice anything meaningful, the greatest gift may have been trust. Trust that Beatrice could carry part of the family's history without turning it into a spectacle. Trust that she understood the difference between privilege and responsibility. Trust that she could remain loyal even when the family was under pressure. And perhaps most importantly, trust that she would know the value of things that could never be measured in pounds. That is the hidden power of inheritance inside a family like Windsor. The public sees numbers. The family sees memories. The public sees diamonds. The family sees the person who wore them. The public sees a house. The family sees birthdays, Christmas mornings, arguments, laughter, and decades of shared life. When a monarch dies, those memories do not pass automatically to the next sovereign. Someone has to carry them personally. For Beatrice, that role may be more significant than people realize. She is not the heir. She is not the spare in the way Harry once was. She is not the head of the family, but she is part of a generation that can remember the Queen personally, while also adapting to the monarchy that came after her. That is a form of influence that cannot be measured by the line of succession. And perhaps that explains why stories about Beatrice and inheritance continue to attract attention. They offer the possibility that the quieter members of a famous family may hold some of its most important memories. The people standing behind the future king may sometimes be the ones preserving the past. There is also a lesson in the way Beatrice has handled public life. She has not been able to choose every story written about her, but she has been able to choose how much of herself she gives back. Over time, she has moved from being known mainly as the daughter of Prince Andrew to being recognized as a woman with her own professional interests, her own marriage, and her own family. That transition is important for the monarchy. The younger royals cannot simply repeat the lives of previous generations. They have to build identities that make sense in a world where royal privilege is questioned more openly. Beatrice's experience shows how someone can remain part of the institution while also developing a life outside its traditional structure. So when people ask what Princess Beatrice may have received from Queen Elizabeth, they may be asking the wrong question. The better question is what Elizabeth believed Beatrice could carry forward. Was it a piece of family history? Was it a personal memory? Was it simply the confidence that came from being loved by a grandmother who had seen almost everything? Those answers may remain private. What is clear is that Beatrice's place in the family cannot be reduced to an inheritance list. Her story connects Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's generation with the generation of William and Catherine, and with the children now growing up around them. She is part of the bridge between an older royal world and a newer one. And that may be the reason her story becomes more important with time. When the cameras move on from one scandal and one ceremony to the next, the people who remain quietly connected to the family become the keepers of continuity. Beatrice has spent much of her life learning how to do exactly that. There is one final detail that changes the way we should look at her. Beatrice has never needed to be the most famous person in the room. She has often been most effective when she has allowed other people to take the spotlight. In a family where attention can become a burden, that restraint can become a strength. Perhaps Queen Elizabeth recognized that. Perhaps she understood that the granddaughter who did not need constant attention might be one of the safest people to entrust with something personal. That does not prove any particular inheritance story, but it helps explain why the emotional bond between a grandmother and granddaughter can matter even when the public never sees the details. And there is something deeply human about that. Behind the crowns, titles, palaces, and ceremonies was an elderly grandmother watching her grandchildren grow up. She saw Beatrice as a child, then as a young woman, then as a wife and mother. She saw the family change around her. Whatever private decisions she made, they were made after a lifetime of knowing those people personally. That is why the final years of Queen Elizabeth's life continue to generate so much curiosity. People want to know what she thought. They want to know who she trusted. They want to know which grandchildren held a special place in her heart. But some of those answers may never be public, and perhaps that is appropriate. Princess Beatrice's future will not be decided by a single piece of jewelry or a single line in a will. It will be shaped by the choices she makes from this point forward. She can continue to support charitable causes, raise her daughter, protect her family's private memories, and decide how closely she wants to stand beside the working monarchy. If she does become more visible in the years ahead, it will not necessarily mean that she is seeking power. It could simply mean that the monarchy needs more people who know where it came from and understand where it is going. Beatrice has spent her entire life standing between those two worlds, so the real surprise may not be what Princess Beatrice inherited from Queen Elizabeth. The real surprise may be how much of the Queen's influence she already carries. It can be seen in the way she handles family, public pressure, duty, and change. It can be seen in the way she has built a life without abandoning the family that gave her her place. And if there is one thing the story of Beatrice teaches us, it is that the quieter royal can sometimes have the most interesting journey. She was never supposed to be the center of the crown. She did not need to be. Her role has always been different, and that difference may become increasingly valuable as the monarchy moves into a new era. The public often assumes that royal importance follows the order printed beside a person's name. In reality, family influence can move in unexpected directions. A person lower in the succession can become the trusted relative who remembers private stories, protects family traditions, and understands the emotional history of the people at the top. Beatrice has spent decades in exactly that position. Her relationship with Queen Elizabeth also existed outside official ceremonies. Family life was not always about uniforms, balconies, and formal greetings. There were birthdays, holidays, meals, conversations, and quiet moments when the Queen could simply be a grandmother. Those ordinary moments are impossible to measure, but they can explain why certain grandchildren remain emotionally important even when the public sees them only occasionally. Beatrice also had the difficult experience of watching her family face public judgment. That can change a person's understanding of fame. Instead of assuming that royal attention is always a gift, she learned that it can be exhausting and sometimes unfair. Her more measured public presence may have come partly from that experience. She understood that every extra appearance creates another opportunity for a headline. That may be why the future of Beatrice is worth watching without assuming that she will suddenly become a senior working royal. The more realistic possibility is gradual involvement. A major charity project here, a family event there, support for the king at an important ceremony, and continued work outside the traditional royal structure could give her a useful role without changing the entire order of the monarchy. Her daughter also changes the picture. Sienna is growing up in a family where royal history is very close. but where her parents can choose how much of that history enters her daily life. Beatrice now has the same responsibility that Queen Elizabeth once had with her own children and grandchildren, deciding which traditions are worth preserving and which pressures should be left behind. Imagine for a moment a small object in Beatrice's home that once belonged to Queen Elizabeth. To an outsider, it might look ordinary. To Beatrice, it could represent decades of family life. That is why inheritance stories can become so emotional. The monetary value is only one part of the story. The personal history attached to the object can be far greater. This is also why claims about secret royal fortunes should be treated carefully. The Crown's institutional assets are not personal bank accounts, and private estates cannot be assumed to have been divided among grandchildren simply because a story says so. The exact details of Elizabeth's personal arrangements remain private. What can be discussed is the larger pattern. A monarch leaves behind both an institution and a family, and those two legacies are not the same thing. In the end, Princess Beatrice's story is not really about becoming richer than another royal. It is about becoming more secure in her own identity. She has moved through childhood, public criticism, professional life, marriage, motherhood, and the loss of her grandmother. Each stage has changed how she fits into the royal family. The next stage may reveal just how important that quiet position can become. There is another reason this matters when comparing Beatrice with the more senior royals. William's future is defined by the crown. Beatrice's future is defined by choice. That distinction gives her room to develop a life that can remain useful to the monarchy without being controlled by the succession. She can step forward when needed and step back when family privacy matters. In a modern royal household, that flexibility can be extremely valuable. Queen Elizabeth's generation was built around duty, routine, and long service. Beatrice's generation has grown up in a very different environment. Social media can turn a photograph into a global story within minutes. Private family disagreements can become public debates. The younger royals therefore need a different kind of discipline, knowing when to speak, when to work quietly, and when to protect the people closest to them. Beatrice has had years of practice with that balance. Whether or not she received a particular jewel, property, or private gift, the deeper inheritance is already visible. Beatrice inherited a place inside one of the world's most famous families, but she also inherited its complications. She inherited memories of a grandmother who represented stability for generations. She inherited the responsibility of raising a child who will know that history from the inside. And she inherited the freedom to decide what kind of royal life she wants to create. So the next time Princess Beatrice appears beside the senior members of the family, it may be worth looking beyond the photograph. She is not simply another royal standing in the background. She is a granddaughter of Elizabeth, a daughter of Andrew and Sarah, a sister to Eugenie, a wife, a mother, and a member of a generation that will help define what the monarchy looks like after the Queen's long reign. Her story is still being written, and the most surprising chapter may be the one that comes next. There is a final part of the inheritance question that often gets overlooked: the difference between being given something and being trusted with something. A royal heir can receive an asset because of succession. A granddaughter can receive a personal item because a grandparent wanted her to have it. Those are completely different messages. If Beatrice ever became the keeper of a personal piece of Elizabeth's life, the meaning would come from the relationship behind it, not simply from its price. This also explains why the royal family can appear so complicated from the outside. One person may have the title, another may have the public role, another may have the family memory, and another may have the responsibility of protecting that memory. There is no single measure of importance. Beatrice's position sits in that complicated space, and that may be exactly why her story has been underestimated for so long. Barter. The years after Queen Elizabeth's death will reveal even more. As Charles settles into his reign and William's generation prepares for its future responsibilities, the extended family will have to decide how it fits around them. Some relatives may become more private, others may take on selected duties. Beatrice has the experience to do either. She knows the expectations, but she also knows the value of having a life beyond the palace. What makes her story especially powerful is that she does not need to rewrite the past. She can carry the best parts of it forward while leaving behind the parts that caused unnecessary pain. She can remember her grandmother without trying to become her. She can respect the institution without surrendering her individuality. And she can give her daughter a connection to royal history without allowing that history to decide every part of her future. So perhaps the most important inheritance Princess Beatrice could have received was never something that could be photographed. It was a sense of belonging to a family that survived enormous changes. It was the memory of a grandmother who represented continuity for most of her life. And it was the understanding that, when the cameras disappear, what remains is family. That may be the part of Queen Elizabeth's legacy Beatrice is best placed to carry into the future. For Beatrice, that future may be quieter than the future waiting for William. But quiet does not mean unimportant. The monarchy has always depended on people who stand beside the central figures without trying to replace them. They attend when needed, support family members, represent causes, and protect private traditions. Beatrice has already spent years learning how to do this. If the family needs her more in the future, she will not be starting from zero, and perhaps that is the twist in the entire story. The royal family is often judged by who stands at the front, but history is also preserved by the people standing just behind them. Princess Beatrice may never wear the crown, but she can still carry part of the story of the woman who wore it for 70 years. That story, more than any rumored fortune, may be the inheritance that matters most. And as the years pass, the meaning of that inheritance may become clearer. What looks small today can become precious tomorrow. A family story remembered correctly, a private tradition protected, or a simple object kept with care can connect a new generation to the woman who shaped the modern monarchy. Princess Beatrice is now part of that responsibility, whether the public sees it or not. And that is why her place in the royal story may be larger than her position in the line of succession suggests. Indeed,